For the last decade, there has been an empty feeling in the souls of many college football fans. It's a feeling that would come and go depending on the time of the year, but it always lingered. Its absence loomed large, like the dark sky at the funeral. The empty feeling that despite the game on the field being as good as ever, despite every triumph your team has achieved in real life, there was something missing. Something that we all once had and cherished, but was taken away from us in the dead of night. Where was the NCAA football game? Would it ever return? Why am I stuck with a shitty Madden roster update every year instead of having the traditions and pageantry of over 120 college football programs in the palm of my hands? Why am I making this video over part 3 of the National Championship Series? Wait, no, that's unrelated. Why have we been deprived of college football video games for the last decade? 2 reasons. Ed O'Bannon and the NCAA's greed. This is the demise and rebirth of EA Sports college football. In order to fully understand how this game fell, we need to go all the way back to 1993, when Electronic Arts would release a title called Bill Walsh College Football. EA Sports was trying to capitalize on the success of their new Madden NFL franchise and sought to double dip into the video game market by utilizing the previously unused college game. Unlike the NFL, though, the NCAA did not endorse or promote this game, nor did any of the other schools. There was only the endorsement of legendary head coach Bill Walsh, who was coaching Stanford at the time. EA sought to make him the next John Madden, basically, but for college. Despite this being an absolutely batshit idea and having nothing but generic teams, Bill Walsh College Football was a success and would fuel a sequel, Bill Walsh College Football 1995. This time, the 1995 game would feature 36 real Division I teams that would compete in a 16-week season that would end with a trip to a generic bowl game like the Redwood Bowl, because EA had no rights to the actual bowl games, and ironically also featured a playoff mode to determine the national champion. Despite this game also doing well, Bill Walsh and EA did not renew their partnership for the following year, and College Football USA 96 was born. Yeah, the name fucking sucks, but the game sure as hell didn't. Now all teams from Division 1A, aka FBS, are now featured in the game. It also had real bowl games for the first time. The game would continue to gain steam over the next 2 years and add more depth like bigger play selections and different game modes. In 1998, the game got the final name we would all grow to love. NCAA Football 98 would be the first game with the official NCAA licensing under the new agreement with EA Sports. The game would quickly grow in popularity from a slow burn in terms of sales to a white-hot success in the following years. Modes like Dynasty, Create a Team, Mascot Mode, and more would gobble up the attention of gamers across the nation. By the mid-2000s, it was a popular mainstay along with Madden. College football's video game became so popular, the NCAA would also allow EA to expand into college basketball and baseball as well. The main breadwinner, though, would always remain NCAA football. Most years, it was even considered better than Madden because EA would have more freedom to be creative without hardly any oversight from the NCAA. With this increased creativity, however, mistakes were bound to be made. And despite the fans loving the game and the popularity of this game, with all the depth that it had, it would ultimately help lead to the demise of college football video gaming. In 2009, while visiting a friend's house, he noticed a game their kids were playing called NCAA Basketball 2009. He then noticed a classic version of the UCLA Bruins from 1995 that won the national championship. Turns out, he was on that team and was also in the game, except the player that looked so much like him didn't have his name. The name of this character was number 31, but there was no denying it was him. See, ever since real teams began to allow EA Sports to use their trademark, EA was told by the schools and eventually the NCAA to not use any names or images of active players. Recently graduated or drafted by the NFL for the cover is fine, but players still in school were not. Doing so would violate the players' amateurism. EA, of course, would go along with it, and they would push the limits by having players most years look damn near like the players that played in the positions on TV in real life. Now, look, obviously at the time, the rules were pretty clear on the amateurism of players still playing collegiately. If you were a college football player, a college basketball player, a college anything athletic player, you could not profit from being able to play in these sports. You don't accept sponsorships. You don't sign contracts with agents. Nothing. No money cannot come to you. Otherwise, you're no longer an amateur and risk your eligibility. Which was bullshit. It was really fucking bullshit. But it was in the rules. There was no changing it at the time. The problem was that Ed O'Bannon hadn't played collegiately since 1995. He had already gone pro and was now retired, so definitely not an amateur anymore. Yet EA nor the NCAA had ever asked him for permission to use him in their products or games. Granted, his name is not anywhere in the game at all, but the character on the basketball team looks pretty much like him. There's no denying that. Like, the game technology at this point had advanced to where you really couldn't confuse him for another person on that team. So not too long after, O'Bannon files a lawsuit with over a dozen other former athletes for not being compensated for their appearance in games after they graduated college. The lawsuit boiled down to two arguments. The main one the NCAA kept on pointing back to is that the NCAA had an amateurism policy that forbid them from paying the student athletes in any way, shape, or form at any time. And that was it. Literally, that was the entire crux of the argument, was that because these players swore to uphold the values of the NCAA's version of amateurism, they are not entitled to receive any fucking payment whatsoever. However, O'Bannon argued off of not NCAA law, but federal law. First, he outright claimed that the NCAA's form of amateurism violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by preventing student athletes from being paid for their use of the names, images, and likenesses. They also claimed to use his likeness in any video game without consent was an illegal restraint of trade, to quote the Justia article I'm reading on this, because I'm not good with law speak at all. Basically, he's saying, no, you can't just use my fucking face and my person in whatever you want. I'm not a free commodity. I'm a human being. Pay me, motherfucker. The NCAA could have argued that they were incidental by using these players in their game, that there was no attempt to actually use the real life person, and that similarity does not mean they were trying to copy them. But one quick subpoena for all of EA Sports fucking emails from the early 2000s put that one to bed. Basically, EA, the NCAA, and the schools involved were all working together to make these players as real life as possible, down to making attributes for them, basing their looks pretty closely off of them with the technology they had at the time, and just everything but the name of the player was put into these games. On the one hand, you gotta admit, EA was just doing their job by wanting to make the most realistic video game possible. On the other, it was really fucking irresponsible to not even try to pay these players. Long story short, the NCAA lost horribly. Yeah, they appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court told them, get the fuck out of my house, and toss the case aside. On top of paying the plaintiffs over $40 million, including fees and legal costs, the ruling also forced the NCAA, for the first time, to not only just give out scholarships to their student athletes, but to also make sure the players were offered cost of living expenses as well that were not included in the scholarships before. The absolute bare fucking minimum. and they still fought tooth and nail to avoid it. What the fuck, guys? Let's step back for a moment here. In early 2010, before this lawsuit even reached the final ruling, EA would pull the plug on its NCAA basketball series, which was the catalyst for the entire suit. As time went on and the case progressed, it became pretty fucking clear to EA they were not going to win this case. And so in May of 2014, partnering with the CLC, they settled the case for themselves. The NCAA, being stubborn as fuck, wanted to die on the hill and would not join them. But EA and CLC would also end up paying around $40 million as well. However, this money didn't go to the lawyers, but to the players. The former players representing the O'Bannon case, as well as any player used in NCAA football or basketball since 2003. Over 100,000 players received checks in the mail at long last for using their name, image, and likeness in the video games. And there were pretty nice ones too, ranging from anywhere of a couple hundred to a couple $1,000s, depending on how important of a player you were at the time. Around the same time as this settlement, the NCAA announced that they were going to pull out of their agreement with EA Sports, and it would no longer allow them to use NCAA, the name, in their video games. While this would be a small blow to the developmental team, they still had the backing of the CLC, who actually distributes the trademarks for individual schools. Plans for the following year's game, with the working title of College Football 15, continued forward as EA Sports began working to bring the college game to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, the next generation of consoles at that time. Plans for the next game would include going as far away from making real-life players as possible, because obviously, they just had to fork over tens of millions of dollars. EA Sports was really trying to make the most of this opportunity, adding in a bunch of new features and planning to really push the game to its limits on the next generation of consoles. Sadly, the PR around the case was starting to erode the trust of individual schools and conferences in EA Sports. If EA was able to pay the players directly, which they said that they were willing to do, this game still could have happened. However, the NCAA outright refused to allow this, and the game quickly fell apart as one by one, a couple of schools would abandon the game, saying they didn't want EA touching their trademarks, using their likeness in the game, which was very ironic, I'm going to say that right now. And quickly, entire conferences even pulled out of the game. With the game falling apart at the seams thanks to losing almost all of the schools that they could use, and with the corporate bosses not being willing to revert to a generic version of the game, similar to Bill Walsh 1993, EA decided that despite the financial and critical success of the most recent game, it was time to pull the plug, and NCAA football was completely canceled. If there was a sign that the landscape of college football was changing, this was definitely an opening shot. When the NCAA lost this lawsuit to O'Bannon, there was a feeling that more cases would soon be against them. For the first time since the 1980s, they had lost a major court case and were being forced to make changes that they otherwise would not have done. While the O'Bannon case was pretty isolated and targeted specifically the illegal use of real-life athletes in video games after they graduated, O'Bannon's victory opened the door for more lawsuits to follow and even state laws that would expand the rights of the student athletes. One state law in particular was the state of California declaring a law in 2019 that allowed student athletes to be paid for sponsorships and the use of their name, image, and likeness no later than the year 2023. Soon, a new legal case would also be filed. In the case NCAA versus Alston, it directly argued that student athletes should be compensated for their use of name, image, and likeness and receive more benefits because of it. The NCAA would fight all the way to the Supreme Court, and were naturally bitch-slapped again for violating antitrust laws in June 2021. 1 month later, the NCAA announced it would be removing many restrictions on college athletes from receiving endorsements and sponsorships for the first time ever. While it didn't allow student athletes to be paid by the schools directly, it did allow them to profit off of their name, image, and likeness for the first time ever. AKA, it was a huge fucking deal, and the effect was immediate. Schools began to install third-party NIL programs to negotiate deals for their scholarship athletes. While the schools couldn't pay them directly, the donors and alumni sure could, and the money started to pour in. While this changed many things for student athletes across the country and caused the geriatric bastards of the NCAA to finally eat crow, it also suddenly made a problem for EA Sports vanish entirely and made the return of college football games so much easier. Now, while the NCAA was slowly watching their amateurism monopoly wither and die in the sun, EA had seemingly moved on from college games entirely. The developers in EA that were working on the NCAA football games were transferred to other departments and moved on with their lives. Fans also moved on and tried to fill the void with yearly Madden releases, new independent football games that used generic teams and rosters, and replaying the ever-loving fuck out of NCAA 14. None of these options being particularly satisfying, but hey, sometimes you gotta make chicken salad out of chicken shit, right? There was, however, a few people over time who gained enough influence in the company to finally sway the AAA title to return to college video games. One such person was Daryl Holt, a senior vice president and group general manager at EA Sports. Holt, who was an original NCAA football development team member, developed a plan and strategy to get the green light for a college football video game to return. And in 2019, in a fateful meeting at EA Sports World Headquarters with President Cam Weber, he did it. While it wouldn't become public knowledge until early 2021, EA at this time began to develop the return of college football to video games. Now keep in mind, the NCAA versus Alston case wasn't decided until 2021, and EA was likely prepared to make a fully generic roster with individual licenses from the schools. However, how that would have worked remains under wraps, as the Alston case and the NCAA's own lifted restrictions against sponsorships to the student athletes made it possible for EA to finally work directly with current players and add them into the game. Considering that before this, EA couldn't even get some players from the US women's national team into their FIFA games since they were still in school, it was a big step towards the return of the game. EA also did something very unlike EA. They gave the development team time. Originally scheduled internally to return in 2023, EA gave them an additional year to make certain that they got this right. With a team composed of guys and girls from the original NCAA football series, the beloved college football revamped series that modernized the NCAA 14 game with mods, and new faces from other departments or even other companies. Finally, after years of work, an impressive amount of secrecy, so much so that it was hard to get anything out of them for a long period of time, fans across the world rejoiced as EA gave the date of July 19th, 2024 as the date for the return. Under the new title of EA Sports College Football 25, it's finally here, it's finally back. College football has returned to video games. So after hearing all of the facts and all of the information from everything in this video, here's my 2 cents on the whole thing. Number 1, EA Sports is not a saint. Don't pretend for a second that I am here to suck their dick. I am not. EA Sports has for years, and I mean years, put out subpar products in Madden and other video games as well. However, when EA is allowed to be creative, not being held down by either their own bosses or the NFL, in certain games, we know that EA Sports is a AAA title. We know these fuckers can cook. We know the quality they've put out. So, at the expense of looking like an idiot in just about a month, I'm going to trust their word and say that Yeah, I think that this game could very well be one of the best football games ever made. A couple of things to note. There were a lot of people saying that Madden and NCAA are just going to be clones of one another. That is just simply not the case. From everything that I have read, everything that I have heard from content creators that got the early look of both EA Sport College Football 25 and Madden 25, they are using two completely different styles. Yes, they are using the Frostbite engine, but the other mechanics that go into the game are about as separate can be. There are 134 different individual football stadiums for College Football 25. You can't put that in Madden. You got all of the features except for a handful of things they just did not have time for back in College Football 25 that you saw in NCAA 14. Dynasty, Road to Glory, that's all back. Team Builder, that's back. Fuck, Madden's borrowing Team Builder from NCAA to put into their game for the first time in years. Something that the fans have been literally begging for. What I am going to say is that the NCAA did not help themselves in any respect with this game. Yes, this game is not a deal breaker for the NCAA. The fact that their name is not on the title of the video game is not what's going to kill them. What it does show, though, is the NCAA is in some deep fucking shit. If all it takes to see what the state of your organization is by looking at a video game and tracking the timetable of when that video game ended to when it came back, compared to the timetable of when you were making a ton of money to possibly starting to lose money, especially with the most recent court cases, including NCAA versus House, where the NCAA may have to start paying literally all of their players here soon. You understand the downfall of the NCAA is coming quicker than we think. But that's just speculation. What I will say is I am damn excited for this game. And I hope after watching this video, you have a better understanding of why that is.